Hey BookTube, it's Carrie. Thanks for joining me. I wanted to pop in and talk about the 3 books that I read this week. The first book that I read was Persepolis, The Story of a Childhood by Marjane Satrapi. And this book is a graphic novel and it's autobiographical. I typically don't read graphic novels, but this one came highly recommended to me by my friend Allison, and she also gifted this copy to our library, so of course I had to read it. This book follows the author between the ages of 6 and 14 as she's growing up in Iran. So it covers the time period of the overthrow of the Shah, the Islamic Revolution, and also the war with Iraq. And I think it was really appropriate to learn about this time period through the eyes of a child, because you're seeing the ever-changing nature of these different regimes. You're seeing the young girl trying to reconcile what her parents have taught her with what her teachers are telling her at school, what the news broadcasts are saying, and also what she knows to be true. And we're also seeing a struggle within her about her religion, because even though Marjane is extremely religious, she is a very modern girl. And so we see this conflict within her about what's going on in her country and what she believes about her religion. So a very interesting way to learn about this particular time period in Iran's history, and it does show the human cost of political repression and war in a very accessible way. Now, Marjane was pretty privileged. Her great-grandfather was actually one of the last emperors of Iran, so she definitely has a lot more leeway than maybe some of the other children growing up in this time period. And so it's interesting to see the influences of Western cultures on her, the influences of her background and her family's background, and to see how that plays out in the Islamic Revolution and the revolutionary regime is pretty interesting. But I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend this one, and the graphics in it are black and white, which I really liked because I don't typically read graphic novels, so I think maybe a lot of color would have been a little bit distracting for me. Now, the second book that I read this week is actually part of a buddy read that I'm doing with Summer over at Cozy Reading with Quaker Cats and John at Hey Y'all Listen Up. And it is called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. This is really a psychological and sociological study about introverts. It includes several questionnaires throughout the book that you can look at to try to kind of self-assess your characteristics and kind of reflect on some of your own qualities that may be introverted or extroverted. I really enjoyed that part, and as part of our buddy read, it was pretty interesting for us all to kind of share our answers to those questionnaires. I kind of identified myself as what they call a pseudo extrovert, so I definitely have a lot of introverted tendencies, and I love people, and I have a job that makes it necessary for me to be more of an extrovert at that job, but that does take a little bit out of me, and so it was very interesting to reflect on some of the things that it talked about in this book, and I think a lot of people would probably identify with it. It was really interesting to me how corporate America has really influenced our society's focus on this, quote, extrovert ideal. And the author identifies a time period somewhere in the 19th century where we shift from being kind of a values-oriented society where we value things like integrity and honesty to now being a society that values salesmanship and being gregarious and being good at presentations. The not so shocking second part to that is that corporate America also influences our educational system, because in the corporate world, we see these open floor plans. We see a lot of emphasis placed on brainstorming and working together in collaborative groups. And we see the same focus in education today. We see a lot of emphasis placed on collaborative learning. When the author points out here, some of the research that's been done actually says that brainstorming and collaborative learning doesn't necessarily lead to more ideas or better ideas. Something that was really disturbing is that at the Harvard Business School and a lot of these MBA programs tend to value those students who have the best social qualities, as far as, being great at networking, and presenting. Their ideas don't necessarily have to be the most intelligent or the best, but if the delivery is good, then they're seen as a top-notch student. And so we see that these same people are the CEOs of major companies who are making major decisions. The author went a little bit too far with me when she started making connections to the 2008 economic crisis. I don't know if there's enough evidence to say that because extroverts tend to take more risk, that they're responsible for the 2008 financial crisis. I don't know that I would go that far, but it was a very thought-provoking idea. But all of the information about how corporate America has shaped our extrovert ideal and our education system was totally on point. She also talked about trying to promote introverts and valuing their characteristics. Introverts need solitary, quiet, reflective time. And so I think we need to get away from devaluing independent work, because I think we need to give our students and our children time to actually think. In teaching, that's something else that is looked at as wait time when you're questioning in class. If you don't give enough wait time for students to process the question and think about it and actually give an answer, don't be shocked when they don't have any ideas. We're so kind of quick to give the answer, but I think we need to get away from that. I think quiet, reflective time is not a bad thing. Let's see, something else in the book that I really enjoyed was the profiles of famous introverts who are leaders. So people like Rosa Parks, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Steve Wozniak were featured, which was pretty neat. Of course, there were a couple mentions of Kennedy. So, I've been accused on BookTube of having a, quote, weirdo obsession with John F. Kennedy. And, I will wear that badge with pride. So the first reference talked about one man who was interviewed for this book said his parents always said, "Why can't you be more like the Kennedy boys?" The Camelot-besotted parents repeatedly asked him. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But then it also talked about this extrovert need for buzz or kind of an adrenaline rush. And this blindness to danger may explain why extroverts are more likely than introverts to be killed while driving, be hospitalized as a result of accident or injury, smoke, have risky sex, participate in high-risk sports, have affairs, and remarry. It also helps explain why extroverts are more prone than introverts to overconfidence, defined as greater confidence unmatched by greater ability. Buzz is JFK's Camelot, but it's also the Kennedy curse. And I will agree with that. Before I actually got to that statement in the book, I was thinking about how Kennedy would fit into this. And because of his propensity for risky behavior and his kind of need to be the center of attention and around people, and how he kind of thrived in those circumstances, in my opinion, he's a classic extrovert. But I also thought that his brother Bobby was more of what the author calls a pseudo extrovert. I think that because of the nature of being a Kennedy and because of the nature of his job, he had to have those extroverted tendencies, but I think it took a lot out of him, and I believe that Bobby was a bit more cerebral. He was more religious, which are things that are typically associated with introverts. They're usually more reflective, and I do think that, in my opinion, that explains some of the differences between those two Kennedy brothers. I would definitely recommend this one. The last book that I read this week was Five Total Strangers by Natalie D. Richards, and this is a young adult mystery thriller. We follow a teenager named Mira who is traveling from California back home to Pittsburgh. She's been in California going to a prestigious art school, and she's been staying with her dad, but she's going back home to her mom, and she's really worried about getting home for Christmas because her mother's twin sister died the previous Christmas, and it was a really devastating loss for her mother. Mira also was very close to her Aunt Phoebe as well. So it's a very emotional time for her. So when her plane lands and she finds herself stranded at Newark Airport, she is in panic mode. And this leads her to make a very bad decision. She decides to get into a rental car with a girl that she met on the plane. And this girl also allows these three other strangers to join her and Mira. So we have five strangers in a car together driving in horrific winter weather trying to get to Pittsburgh. This was a very quick read. I read it in 2 sittings. It was definitely a mystery that had a lot of red herrings in it. I did enjoy it. There are some creepy people at some rest areas on the drive. And things in the car go missing. You don't know who you can trust in this car because even Mira, she could be an unreliable narrator. We're not even sure about her. So I don't want to ruin anything about this book for you in case you do read it, but I will say ever so often you will have a letter in the book, and the letters are very creepy. And they're just creepy enough to make you want to read a little bit more. I will say at the end, there are some kind of unanswered questions or things about the characters that you don't know, but you don't really care because there's not a lot of character development. It's not a character-driven book. And so you don't really care too much about having everything wrapped up. As long as the big mystery is solved, you're okay with it. This one would probably have been a good book to read during the last winter storm that we had, because there's lots of near misses due to the winter weather as well. So I really enjoyed this one and I would recommend it. I am also going to do a video on the other book that I read this week, which was The Humor of JFK, and I will probably release that on St. Patrick's Day. If you all have read any of these books, please shoot me a comment. Let me know what you thought. And I hope you're having a great week, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks, guys.